Hi, this is Graham Helfrich, Technical Advisor Manager for the Engineering Software here at IHS Markit. Welcome to the weekly Did You Know episode, where we learn how to do something of value that you probably didn't know about your IHS Markit engineering software. When I was 10 years old, my parents sent me to summer camp. One night, we're all around a fire pit waiting for it to be lit. One of the camp leaders announced that she was going to call on the spirit of Woody the Wood Elf to start our fire. The leader took a bottle from her pocket and poured a liquid onto the wood. A few seconds later, smoke and fire leapt up and our campfire was lit. Now, I later learned that there were two chemicals used in this trick. The first one is potassium permanganate, which is this purple powder, and the second was glycerin. When you combine these, boom, you get fire. So after that summer camp, I took this trick home and I dazzled all my friends and family, asking Woody the Wood Elf to come light our campfire. So that summer, I learned how combining two substances could do something amazing. What if I told you that combining two engineering tools can let you do something amazing too? Well, that's today's topic, combining RTA and Piper to maximize your production. Now, what I'm talking about is taking your transient RTA reservoir models that you probably already have built and connecting them to a surface hydraulic software called Piper. So what this is going to do is show you where your current bottlenecks are and also let you plan your drilling schedule to tie wells in to your gathering system to see when and where there will be bottlenecks, to see what size compression you need or what line loops you may need, and even predict how much production you're going to back out of your existing wells at higher line pressures. Now, to get us started, let's talk about IPR curves. I love IPR curves. They're really helpful when you're in boundary dominated flow and you want to predict if you lower or increase the pressure on your well, how will the rate change, right? They're really nice and easy to understand. They're super helpful. And this is one of the formulas for an IPR curve. The C value, you can think about this as the well's productivity. And in boundary dominated flow, this is typically pretty constant. But in unconventional wells, we are in transient flow. And these IPR curves don't really work so well. And let me explain what I mean. So what I have here is a unconventional RTA reservoir model, and I'm producing IPR curves through time. The first IPR curve basically, in the first day, it's way off here on the right-hand side of the screen. It's something like 12 million cubic feet per day as our initial rate. And after a month, of course, we have these steep declines, and our IPR curve is different after a month. And then after 2 months, we have another IPR curve, and then all the way down to a year. So the point is, IPR curves are constantly changing when we're in transient flow. Their productivity is changing. And if anyone is giving you an IPR curve for an unconventional well, they have to have some sort of time associated with it. When is this IPR curve relevant? Because they're changing all the time. So this is one of the limitations if you're using an IPR curve with any sort of wellbore or pipeline hydraulics. Instead, we're going to be leveraging the transient RTA models. So here we are in Harmony Enterprise, and there are 60 shale gas wells here. They all have production history, they all have wellbores, they all have fluid properties. In fact, every single well has already been analyzed and has a reservoir model with a unique history match. So every single well has one of these history match RTA models. Now, one of the challenges when we need to make a production forecast from any sort of reservoir model is we have to give it a constraint, usually a pressure constraint. So in this case, when we do a 30-year forecast, we can assume a constant bottom hole flowing pressure if we want, and we get an EUR of about 3.2 BCF. But if instead we're going to be gradually lowering the flowing pressure over time or increasing the drawdown, that EUR will change. In fact, If we look at this particular well, we see how the cum will be impacted at a constant flowing pressure versus at a higher drawdown. We go from 3.2 to 4 BCF as our EUR. So how do we actually reliably predict the drawdown of our wells into the future? Well, we need to consider the wellbore and the pipeline hydraulics, including compressors, line loops, etc. And that's where we need a pipeline hydraulic software. So what we're looking at here is the software called Piper. Okay, and Piper is just a pressure calculator. So we have our 60 wells here. We have our pipeline networks. Each of the colors represent the pipeline diameter. Now to get the model actually set up from scratch, it's really easy. There's a couple options. You can bring in a picture, like a map like this, and everything on here has a position on the world, a latitude and longitude. And so if we bring a picture in, we can actually draw the pipelines on the map, and it knows the scale. So we have the right distance and length, so we do the pressure loss calculations correctly. Or if you have a shapefile, you can import that and then convert it into your pipeline network. Okay, so what's the point of doing this? Well, first of all, we want to get a snapshot of where are the restrictions in our gathering system today. And to do that, we can turn on our pressure distribution map. We see that these wells have a very high back pressure and these wells have a lower back pressure. Why is that? Well, let's look at where the friction is. Okay, so the colors of the pipes are now representing how many psi in pressure we're losing from friction. So we can immediately see that the red pipes are our problem areas. Okay, so this is a snapshot of today. But what about our future forecasts? This is where we want to leverage that RTA work. So back in Harmony, we're going to go export to Piper. Okay, and this is going to let us export all 60 of our wells, including the fluid properties, well bores, and analytical reservoir models. Back in Piper, we just go import from Harmony. And we can grab that Harmony file with all of that reservoir and wellbore information. Once we do that single import into Piper, we can see that every well has the permeability, fracture half length, lateral length, etc., all imported directly into Piper, as well as our wellbore descriptions for every single well. Okay, now we're ready to forecast as an integrated asset model. And I want to show you how fast this is live. Okay, so I'm about to begin a forecast into the future where we predict the monthly production forecast. Now, the forecast is going to use the RTA models that we've imported into Piper. But in order to calculate the flowing pressure every month, it's going to be an iterative process. So we're going to start at our delivery point, go through the compressors, through the pipelines, down the wellbore to each RTA model. And it's going to predict the rate. It's going to go back up the wellbore through the pipelines, and it does that iteration. So every month we get a new drawdown calculated based on the constraints of the system. Okay, so this is the total rate entering the delivery point, 320 million cubic feet per day in month one. We see how the total volume into the delivery point is declining every month based on the potential of the RTA models all working together. And we see this is only a couple seconds every month for this forecast. All right, now we can go back and see how the pressures are going to change into the future. We see how things are getting cooler. That's because the wells are naturally declining, the friction is becoming less, and the flowing pressure is getting better for each well. Okay, so this is kind of our base case scenario. But in this case, we have 40 new wells that we want to tie in over the next few years. How do we predict that? Well, instead of using a type curve or a decline for our future wells, we want to make something smarter, something that's more reactive to changes in drawdown, plus we'll consider transient flow in the reservoir. So what we're going to do is create a type RTA model, basically an average reservoir for our future wells. And every well of the 40 wells that'll be tied in will have its own individual future RTA model that will predict the rate at any drawdown. Okay, so in Piper, these gray wells are those 40 future wells that we need to tie in. Okay, so now we're going to see as we tie them in, we're going to see if there's more red, basically if there's more friction and if there's some basically increasing wellhead pressures. Okay, so I already see some red area over here as these wells are being tied in. This is telling me that I'm probably backing out some of those wells, and I can see exactly where the friction is happening. This is where I need to consider some line looping or maybe some local compression. Okay, great. So let's compare these two forecasts. Okay, so what I've done is I've isolated these wells that are in the bottom right of my gathering system where we're doing the tie-ins. And if we just forecast this area with no new wells, the total production will look like this into the future, combining all those RTA models and the hydraulics that will occur. Alternatively, if we do tie in those 40 new wells, we'll get an increase in our total production, of course, as we see here, right? So this is our forecast with the PUDs. But remember, we saw some bottlenecks. We saw some red wells suggesting maybe we're going to back out production from the old ones. Piper will let us predict exactly that, okay? So those old wells, instead of producing in the blue line, they're actually going to produce at a lower rate because they're operating at a higher back pressure. So we can actually predict and quantify exactly how much production we're going to back out from those old wells if we don't plan our facilities better when we tie in the new ones. Okay, for me this is a kind of a game changer, especially for unconventional wells. So when we see this, we say, well, let's optimize our gathering system. Let's plan things like compression or line looping to see what our new rate could be if we let these wells operate at a lower flowing pressure. So back in Piper, we're going to schedule some line loops. This is one of the restrictive pipelines, and we pick a date when we want to install a line loop. Okay, so we see the line is twinned. The colors are cooler, suggesting we have less friction going on. And then we did another twinning of the pipelines down here about 1 year into the future. There. Okay, so how does this impact increasing our production rates? Okay, well, the yellow forecast is our production rate if we do not add any extra facilities, if we just keep our restrictive pipelines in there, right? But we tie in the new wells. If we schedule that line loop on the upper part of the system here, if we twin it, we're going to get this new production in gray. We're going to get that uplift from allowing the wells to operate at a lower flowing pressure. This is what Piper can predict when you connect it with RTA. Now when we schedule that second line loop in the other part of the system, we get another incremental uptick to our production as well. Now overall, by scheduling these pipeline optimization, we're actually going to get an increase in 18% both in our rate and our cum over the life of this field. And this is able to be predicted reliably connecting RTA and Piper together. Now a few other benefits of connecting these together is we can actually predict when every single well will liquid load in the future. And we can give this to our production engineers to plan their artificial lift or coiled tubing scheduling. We're also able to plan our new wells and imagine what tubing size should we put in our well bores. So this is showing our initial rate, and this is showing when liquid loading will begin. This is if we flow up the casing. Or if we install 2 7/8, we get a lower peak rate, but we liquid load later, or 2 3/8, lower initial rate, but we delay liquid loading the longest. And we can still generate these IPRs using transient reservoir models if we want to, just for illustration purposes to other team members like this. So in summary, that summer, when I was at summer camp, I learned if you combine 2 chemicals, you can really do something amazing. So my question for you is, if you've done RTA work already and you want to plan your gathering system, including that transient flow in the reservoir for today and into the future, combining RTA and Piper together is going to be your solution. So what does this mean for you? Well, if you're trying to do RTA forecasts, you need to know what the back pressure will be, and that includes the wellbore and the surface hydraulics, and that's exactly what we talked about here with Piper. Next, if you really are trying to quantify how much production you're going to back out if you have system constraints with your gathering system, that's what Piper can do for you as well. If you're trying to determine, should I do central compression, well site compression, or line loops, what will the uptick be? That is what we can do here. If you've already done the RTA work and you just want to squeeze more value out of it, this is one of the ways you can do it. Now, what are some next steps if you're interested in this? Well, one, contact me. I have some references I can give you of people who do this in real life, oil and gas operators who can attest to how reliable it is. Next, we would love to help you get your gathering system model set up with your RTA models. We can do this as a turnkey solution and hand everything off to you running. If you're interested in a trial, let me know. And any questions at all, just contact me. And that's it. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions, give me a call or email and subscribe to be notified of next week's episode.